Thank you, Lucy. Thank you and welcome, everybody. Thank you, Helbling, for making this webinar possible. My topic is the title of the book, which you see there illustrated, just in case you need convincing that there is a book. There's a book called Teaching Grammar Creatively, and I am going to talk about some of the ideas in the book related to creativity and also to demonstrate some of the activities. And that will involve your help. So keep your chat window fingers ready, because I'll be asking you to do some of the work for me. Okay, let's start. So here's the first task for you. In the chat box, here is a sort of structure or a sentence. Let's call it a sentence. And it has two adjectives, adjective, adjective, and then a noun. Now, the noun has to be either a plural noun or an uncountable noun like water or air or whatever, or a plural noun like rabbits. And an intransitive verb, you know what an intransitive verb is? A verb that doesn't take an object, like run, or some verbs are both transitive and intransitive, so eat can be used intransitively. And then an adverb, and of course you know what an adverb is, all those lovely words that end in ly, apart from anything else. So, for example, if we were to complete this little table, make a sentence, we could write something like this: big, adjective; hairy, adjective; gorillas, plural noun; eat, yes, because we can use that intransitively, you don't have to have an object; and noisily, the adverb. Okay, got the idea? So what I would like you to do is yes, you've already started. Big black, sleep tired, color, ooh, big black cat runs quickly. Okay, small pretty rabbits run quickly. Fancy smart children laugh stealthily. Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. So you got the idea. And somebody, beautiful sunny days pass by quickly. Yes, they do indeed, sadly. Bright, cheerful sunflower sweat. Yeah, that's getting a little bit more elaborate. Young, naughty children sleep peacefully, and so on. Fantastic. Yes. Now, I noticed as I scroll back there, some of you were quite clever, and you spotted the secret sentence that nobody would probably produce in 100 years. And it's this one. And colorless green ideas sleep furiously. Indeed. And it's a famous sentence because who said it? Yes, thank you. Luca. Chomsky, indeed. Noam Chomsky. Now, he said it. The question is, why did he say it? Or why did he invent this sentence? There he is in his relative youth. He was making a point, wasn't he, about language, that language is rule-governed creativity. And it's also all about grammaticality, what makes a sentence grammatical. So this is straight from his book, 1971, two sentences. Number one, colorless green ideas sleep furiously, I've just seen, and furiously sleep ideas green colorless. And he says both sentences are nonsensical. They don't make sense. Yeah, because you can't have something that's both colorless and green, and ideas don't sleep, and whatever, things don't sleep furiously. So it doesn't make sense. But it is grammatical. Whereas the second one, which is equally nonsensical, is not grammatical. We can't form sentences like that in English. And so that was the point he was making. What is grammatical? What is not grammatical? And what he was trying to say is, it's nothing to do with the meaning. It's all to do with the structure, the syntax. And look at the book that he wrote that in. It's called Syntactic Structures. So that's why this sentence is so famous. The most famous sentence in the whole of linguistics. And of course, everybody's And there's lots of fun websites of people trying to create context to say, no, this you could say in a particular context, colorless green ideas sleep furiously. He concluded from this, or one of his arguments was that creativity in language is based on a system of rules and forms. You've got to have the rules, those rules that make a sentence like colorless green dreams ideas sleep furiously grammatical, whereas the other one is not. That's the system. Those are the rules. Without such constraints, we have chaos. We have arbitrary and random behavior, not creative acts. We have sentences like furiously sleep ideas green colorless. We don't want that, do we? That is chaos. And of course, then he went on in a very elaborate theory to explain how these grammatical structures are innately embedded in our brains. And that's a whole other argument. But those of you who have done transformative generative linguistics will recognize these kinds of structure trees. Now, just one more quote from the great Noam Chomsky. And this is interesting. He says, the fundamental aim in the linguistic analysis of a language L, let's say any language, just call it L, this is the fundamental aim in the linguistic analysis, is to separate the grammatical sequences from the ungrammatical sequences. What is grammatical in this language? What is not grammatical? That's the fundamental aim. Now, of course, a lot of people say, no, actually, no, the fundamental aim is about semantics as well, about the meanings of these sentences. But he's not interested in the meanings. He's interested in the syntax. So this is the distinction. 1971, it became kind of institutionalized, this idea that some sentences in the language were grammatical and some sentences were not grammatical. And of course, we get that in all of our grammar books. Is it grammatical? Is it not grammatical? Here's no criticism of these grammar books. We love and adore them. We've used them countlessly, but from Raymond Murphy, English Grammar and Use. So you've got to decide, is this right or is this wrong? Look, somebody's climbing up that tree over there. Now, it doesn't matter if it's true or not. That's not what we're interested in. Is it grammatically correct? Which box do we put it in? Well, yeah, sounds all right to me. Can you hear those people? What do they talk about? Can you hear those people? What do they talk about? And the idea is, of course, no, that's wrong. That's wrong. Even though, now this is interesting, even though it is well-formed, it's well-formed, it is actually grammatical. This is where it gets a little bit, what do they talk about? Nothing wrong with that. Are you believing in God? It's grammatical. But can we think of a context in which anybody would say that? Well, that's an interesting challenge, actually. Here's another similar activity from Swan and Walter. So they have to choose, again, which one is correct, which one is not. Again, we're looking at tenses. So number 3, I've done a lot of stupid things in my life, or I did a lot of stupid things in my life. I mean, again, they're both grammatically correct. They're well-formed. The words are in the right order, and they've got the right endings, but it's all about the context here. Can you think of a context when somebody would say, yeah, I did a lot of stupid things in my life? Somebody in heaven, maybe, looking back, saying, yeah, I'm dead now, but I did a lot of stupid things in my life. Or number 10, have you seen any good films recently? Or did you see any good films recently? Well, a lot of speakers of American English would be very happy with, did you see a lot of good films? So we have problems with this. But it is kind of institutionalized in English teaching methodology, not just English, any language, that you've got nice sentences and you've got the not so nice sentences. And we don't want the not so nice sentences. And this hasn't gone away. I mean, we still have it. If any of you use Duolingo, it's all about get the sentence right or get the sentence wrong. No context. It doesn't matter. Is this sentence correct? No. 7 billion people is enough. No, sorry, it should be 7 people are enough. Wrong. Or the woman in is the fridge. No, correct answer. The woman is in the fridge. The woman is in the fridge. Again, think of a context. Where that woman who came to stay, where is she? Or this one I find very puzzling. Did you read the news in the newspaper? No, no, sorry. Correct answer was, did you read the news in the newspaper? Anyway, that's what's happening here. Now, that's how I was trained as a teacher, to believe in the correct sentences and the incorrect sentences, and we have to focus on the correct sentences. So the first book I ever used as a teacher, not in 1967, it was published in 1967. I came along a little bit, but it was still very, very popular when I started teaching English. Some of you will be familiar with it. Alexander's series, New Concept English, First Things First. And in the teacher's book, the First Things First, he says, this is 1967, the student should be trained to learn by making as few mistakes as possible. By making as few mistakes as possible. He, always a male, should never be required to do anything which is beyond his capacity. If the student is to make the most of his abilities, he must be trained to adopt correct learning habits right from the start. Must not let the students make mistakes. Oh, mistakes, terrible. They might escape. They might infect the other learners. So everything, when I started teaching, was to march the students down a very narrow road where there was no chance they could step off the road and make mistakes. Everything had to be accurate. It had to be grammatically correct. But then, as I was, sometimes it just seemed like some of the things that my students were producing, it seemed there was something else going on. That wasn't just grammar. So this is a teenager in Barcelona, in a little test in the school local, our own exam test, had to write a composition saying, describe the best day of your life. Describe the best day of your life. 100 words. So we're talking about A1, A2 maybe. Describe the best day of your life. So you think, so this is what the student wrote. The best day of my life, I was born. Was I born? This day, my mother was very fat and her weight was 70 kilos. When the 12 o'clock, I can't sleep very much and I said, I want to go out. I screamed and danced in the bowels of my mother. I mean, isn't that amazing? I mean, there's something going on here that the student has stepped off the grammar road or the accuracy road, but has created something which I think is absolutely wonderful. And of course, it's not like students produce language like that. Native speakers produce language like that. Look at this. This is an American poet, modern American poet, 1950s, 1960s, incredibly famous. Apart from anything else, he never used capital letters, not in his name. Anyway, so this is one of his poems. Me up at does, out of the floor quietly stare, a poisoned mouse, still who alive, is asking, what? Have I done that? You wouldn't have. Isn't that marvelous? Me up at does, out of the floor quietly stare, a poison. But I mean, me up at does? What box would Chomsky put that into? Definitely in the non-grammatical box. But, of course, it's a poem. It's a poem. And poetry is more elastic than Chomsky's boxes, because poetry is all about creativity. Creativity. So what are the characteristics of creative language use when we look at it? What makes something creative? Well, one thing is it is original. Nobody else said me up at does. And the other thing is it's kind of playful. We're playing with language, not just communicating meaning, boring old meaning, like what time does the train leave? But it's playful, and we'll look at some examples of that shortly. It takes risks. It pushes the boundaries of language. It does things that original haven't been done before, and it takes risks doing that. And of course, this involves breaking the rules, which Louis Alexander would not have wanted, because everything has to be accurate, accurate, accurate. And in a book about creativity and language, which I'll refer to a number of times, one of the writers says one of the key ways the rule govern. Remember, it was Chomsky who said that languages rule govern. One of the key ways the rule govern nature of language facilitates creativity is by giving us rules not to follow, but to break. In fact, mastering the rules, getting them right, is a precondition of being able to use language creatively. You've got to master the rules before you can break them. That's the argument here. And another person writing about the subject of creativity, Michael Stubbs, is a discourse analysis, and we'll look at the area that he was talking about here, but he puts it very nicely, that language use is a balance between, on the one hand, routine, and the other hand, creativity. I would say it's a balance, but also it's a tension, with each one kind of pulling against the other. Now, going back to my own teaching story, when I was working with using Alexander's First Things First, another very popular technique or device that you don't see so much nowadays is the substitution table. The substitution table, this is a book, 1967, same year as the Alexander book. 101 substitution tables for students. Substitution tables. I'll show you one in a minute. But the argument behind the book is, with these substitution tables, you can speak and write many thousands of English sentences. Many thousands of English sentences without making a single mistake. Now you can see the temptation. This is interesting. So we can generate lots of examples. We can get the students to be creative without making a single mistake. How is this possible? Because all the words are there in the right order. This is a substitution table. So what you've got is 4 columns or slots. One of them is just for the question mark. And you've got the first slot, just one word. And then the second slot where we've got the auxiliary verb, and we've got it in its 2 forms in English. And then we've got all sorts of phrases that can be attached to that. How does one get that? How do you know that? How do people go about it? How does one get tickets? And so on. So you can see this very simple format generates a lot of sentences. So here we have a little key maybe that will unlock creativity, because what we're saying is, yes, you can be creative, but you can also conform at the same time. You could conform to the patterns of the language, because there they are. You don't have to break the rules. You can use the rules, but you can still be creative. And I kind of like this idea. And I wonder why these tables have gone out of fashion. If you go back 100 years, people like Harold Palmer, who's the kind of grandfather of English language teaching, the great Harold Palmer, said in 1916, before I was born, said each sentence that's produced by the substitution table should be examined, recited. I mean, that's what I understand is being kind of like drilled, repeated. And of course, that was the basis of the methodology that I was first trained in. Drill, 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 repeat, 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 these patterns. But he's saying, that's okay. Translate it. Ooh, translate it. Oh, we don't translate anymore. Yes, we do. Of course we do. Retranslate. Translate it into the student's first language, then translate it back again. Ooh, that's a great technique. Acted. Thought. Think about the meaning. Think about it. And concretize. Made concrete. Made into some kind of related to the real world, made relevant. I think this is an amazing list. and and I want to look at some of these ideas of Palmer's in a sense, right? Especially the examining and the thinking and the concretizing. So here's an example using this substitution table format from our book, Teaching Grammar Creatively. So you put, it's so easy. You could write the following table on the board. Of course, you could project it, but you could write it. Or you could dictate the sentence and have students write it in this and then number the columns. Why do fools fall in love? And you elicit other words or phrases that can go into column 3 of the table. So why do birds, gorillas, elephants, babies, dogs, and then phrases that can go into fall in love. Why do dogs eat tennis balls? Because they do, because a friend of mine, their dog ate a tennis ball and it had to have an operation. And I'm thinking, why would you eat a tennis ball if you're a dog, a smallish dog? But anyway, so they produce, using the table, very safe, they produce sentences. And then have a race. In pairs or small groups, ask students to generate as many questions as they can by changing elements in 3 and 4. So you've demonstrated this on the board, and then in their groups, they've got to create as many sentences as they can using this pattern. And the one that produces the most questions in 1 minute are the winners. Give them a minute or 2 minutes, depending on their level. Or it could be the most questions, or it could be the funniest questions, or it could be the most surreal questions, or whatever. And then finally, ask individuals from each group to read out some of their questions and see if anyone can answer them. Why do dogs eat tennis balls? Anybody know? So that's one activity using this very simple format. So what the students have done is actually created, between a class, they've created a lot of questions, and they've created possibilities for conversation. Here's another one. This one involves, I used to do this in class, and I prefer doing it with bits of card, cutting them up. It's a little bit of a faff, but you collect the cards back and you keep them in different envelopes. So each group, you give them the cards. There's 16 cards plus the question marks. And you say, here are 4 questions. 4 questions. Can you create the questions by moving the cards around? Now, when they do this, of course, if they use a card in one question, they can't use it in another one. So it's actually, anybody want to suggest some questions into the, yes, where were you born? Mustafa, thank you. Dogs eat tennis balls because they chew. Yes, unfortunately they're not edible though. But yes, thank you. Where were you born? Says Gune. How long have you? Okay, good. So you're getting the idea. Now, when you're using the cards, you realize that actually you're quite constrained, because if you use where in one, you can't use it in the other. So it gets a little bit tricky. But so the student, and this is fantastic, because the students are working and they're saying, no, hang on, that doesn't work. Let's try. Yeah. And so they're playing with the grammar without kind of realizing it to produce these 4. And here they are in the form of a table. And what are you going to do with those questions? Of course, they're going to ask them to each other. They're going to ask these questions in their groups, and then they're going to report to the class about each other. Fantastic. You see, so that's why it's worth creating these cards and then saving them, because it's more fun when they can move them around. Somebody should put these onto little blocks, like dominoes. Wouldn't that be great? Here's another one. Again, very simple. You're using a table and a numbered columns. So you write a sentence on the board, or you dictate it, like, I heard a seal bark. I heard a seal bark. And ask the students to suggest, where would someone say this? possibly in a zoo, possibly in the Arctic Circle. You make a table out of this and number the columns, and the students copy it. Okay, so they have it in their books. Now, what you're going to do is you're going to read some words to them, and they have to decide which column they go into. So it's a bit like bingo. So you're going to read out, and they'll individually put the words in sentences, and then they can compare. So, for example, a dog. Column 3, no? Growl. Which column? 4. And notice that here the instruction is, if they don't know the words, you can simply translate them or give the definition. Growl. Dog growls when it swallowed a tennis ball. Chase a cat, saw a kangaroo. We. Yeah? Where does we go? Column number 1. Okay. Hop, how, have never heard. Have never heard. What column does that go into? Number 2. And so on, so on, so on. Jump over the minute, so on, so on. Ask students to compare their tables in pairs. And so this is when, it's not a test. They can help each other resolve any problems, correct placing the right words. Is that the end of the activity? Is that the end of the activity? No. Ask the students working in pairs to generate as many sentences as they can. Again, same idea from the table. So they've produced a table like this with all these things in it, but they can then play around. I have never heard a kangaroo hop. No, it's grammatical. Or I have never seen a cow jump over the moon. This can be turned into a competition, a race, and you get students to give you some of the more interesting sentences. So that's creativity within the constraints of the grammar, using the grammar to generate lots and lots, in this case, of accurate sentences, but new sentences, creative sentences. But I also want to look at creativity, remember, as play. And people play with language. That's what poetry, me up at, does. That's what poetry does. It's playful. This is a situation. This is the situation. A student in a classroom, this is a fact. Rod Ellis is watching this. A student threw their book in the bin. And another student, these are kids, these are teenagers, thought that it was so funny that he started to talk about it. And he said, book in the bin. Your book in the bin. My book in the bin. You in the bin. No writing in the bin. You bit in the bin, all right? You writing in the bin. And you see what's happening here? He's, in a sense, doing a little bit like what we've been doing. He's got a kind of, in his head, a substitution table, and he's playing with it to create lots of sentences to make a bit of a joke about this idea. So a woman called Icy Ting, I think. No, PB Tin, working, I think, in Taiwan, has written some very interesting stuff about creativity. And she says learners need to use the second language forms to construct new unknown meanings from a limited data set. So the limited data set here was book in bin. That's all he had, and writing, and that's all he had, and the preposition, but he created a lot of sentences out of it. And so what she thought this was very, very important. And she has written a number of articles about creativity. So creating from a limited data set, because the students don't have, they're not like E.E. Cummings, the poet. They don't have an unlimited data set. They have a very limited data set, especially beginners, but they can still be creative with it. So one activity that she recommends is what are called acrostics. An acrostic, that's acrostic, acrostic, is a poem, but each line of the poem begins with a letter. And the poem itself is about the word that the letters spell. So this was one of her examples. School. And this was what, and so she says, students, she showed them how, and she said, okay, write an acrostic. So working in pairs, groups, whatever, they produce a sentence about a poem about school. So it's a poem. So the rule, we can break the rules, because remember, creativity is about breaking rules. This is what one group came up with in Taiwan. Study hard, competition with our student to get high grades, our obligation to make. Our parents love us. Isn't that great? You want to try write an acrostic? I can't put you into groups. I put you into breakout rooms, but there's so many of you, we will never get you back. So I'll just give you 2 seconds, 2 minutes, a minute. Anybody who's really feeling creative can try using the chat. So the acrostic is Joy, and the poem has to be about joy. Jump on your bed. Yes, brilliant. Journey around the world. Just open your eyes. Joy is one. Oh, wow, God, you're so creative. I don't know why I'm telling you about creativity. You're more creative than I could ever be so quickly. Jubilant. Oh, my, yelled that. Sabrina says she uses this idea with names when talking about personality adjectives. That's very nice. So there you go. There's lots to be done here. Joyful original youth. Yes, yes, yes. It's fantastic. So now Herbert Puchter, who's my co-author on the book teaching, he has this wonderful technique. And I remember seeing him demonstrate this many, many, many years ago during a workshop in Barcelona here, where he was teaching teenagers in Austria, where he lives and works. And he uses this idea called skeleton poems. So the skeleton poem is a skeleton of a poem. It's incomplete. It allows the learners to write their own poems within a kind of safe framework. They can be creative, but there is a safety net, which is the skeleton. And so he uses this example, and this is very good for practicing grammatical structures that are perhaps difficult to produce in volume. Now, it's high time is a good one. It's high time you. Now, what's the strange thing about the expression "it's high time" in English? What's the really bizarre thing about this expression, which causes a lot of grief to students? Do you know? It's high time you. What follows the you? Hey, Roberta, exactly. It requires the past tense. It's high time you went to bed. I mean, but yesterday or now? I mean, why went? So this is one of these strange idiomatic kind of things in English, but it exists. So how can we practice it? Well, we'll put it into a poem. So this is what one of the students produced in Herbert's class in Austria. It's high time you help me with the housework. It's high time you tidied up your room. It's high time you studied harder. Mum keeps saying, Mum, don't be angry. It's my life. I'll do what you want, but please stop nagging. Not a great poem, but, a nice sentiment for a teenager. I did a workshop after this. I was excited by the idea of poetry. And I introduced these ideas to a group of teachers in Mallorca in Spain. And one of the teachers tried it out, and she found a poem online, which she gave to them. And the idea was for them to use this as a model. So this is the poem. It's really cheesy. Hundreds of stars in the pretty sky, hundreds of shells on the shore together, hundreds of birds that go singing by, hundreds of lambs in the sunny weather. hundreds of dewdrops to greet the dawn, hundreds of bees in the purple clover, hundreds of butterflies on the lawn, but only one mother the wide world over. I mean, seriously? Anyway, 19th century poem. Great one, though, to give to students because there's all this repetition built into it. So it's like a skeleton poem. It's like one of Herbert's skeleton poems, but it's all there in this case. So she gave it to her class, and this is what one student produced. Millions, and you can see how closely they followed the model. Millions of snowflakes in the blue sky, millions of swallows on the beach together, millions of flowers in the grass, millions of lions in the sunny desert. Wow. Millions of raindrops falling from the sky, millions of fish in the blue water, millions of stones on the lawn. But only one father the wide world over. So, I mean, pretty good. This is what another student produced. Your body is as beautiful as the sea. Millions of fish jumping in the sea. A lot of stars shine in the black sky. In the rainy stones in the country and the beach. Only a swallow in the cold desert. A lot of birds running in the grass. In the winter, a lot of snowflakes fallen as white as the night. I mean, wow. This is serious teenage angst. Now, I'm interested in this. Now that I look at it, both of these poems have swallows in, and both of them have the desert and stones. So I'm wondering if the teacher made some suggestions. I've read these poems 10,000 times, but I'm suddenly thinking, that's interesting. They're both, that doesn't matter, but they've been very creative in different ways. So, Pin, remember the acrostic woman, says formal constraints. So formal constraint is you've got to write a poem and each line has to begin with this particular letter. Formal constraints lead to complex and creative language use, transforming familiar utterances into unfamiliar ones, shaping and reshaping learners' language syntactically and lexically. Playing with language like that, they transform familiar utterances into unfamiliar ones. And we saw that in your own examples, in fact. Okay, change of subject. Now, if you remember Michael Stubbs, right at the beginning, I had a quotation saying he says that language is a combination of routine and creativity. When he's talking about, he was a lexicologist, or he is a lexicologist, he's talking about routine, meaning a lot of language that we produce is kind of formulaic. We say the same thing again and again and again. Like, would you like a cup of tea? Would you like a cup of tea? Would you like a cup of tea? Or lovely talking to you. Lovely talking to you. Or I look forward to seeing you. I look forward to lots of expressions like that. Here's a number of expressions from the corpus. The most common chunks in English, spoken English, from a corpus, which is a huge database of spoken language, or spoken and written language. You know what I mean? At the end of the, at the end of the day, do you want me to, in the middle of it? I mean, I don't know. Is that this, that, and the other? I know what you mean. All the rest of all this. So these are just 5. So you can see some of them are actually not complete. Number 2, at the end of the, well, it's probably going to be at the end of the what? At the end of the day. But this is just to demonstrate how much of language is formulaic. These are very common, and such that 2 linguists said, we believe that these memorized sentences and phrases are the normal building blocks of fluent spoken discourse. We use these as building blocks. It's easier to produce 5 words at a go than 1 word, 5 words separately. And at the same time, they provide models for the creation, that word again, of many partly new sequences. So we can use these little chunks to create new sequences that are not formulaic. They're new, they're original, which are memorable, and in their turn enter the stock of familiar usages. And they become memorable, people use them again and again, and they become formulaic. And that's the way language tends to develop. So here's an activity from our book that looks at exactly this kind of language. So here's a picture, or 9 pictures, And if you look closely, you see each one is an island. And there are various combinations of a lake, another island, a mountain, a castle, and a monster. Okay, so I'm going to give you a sentence. And you have to tell me which picture it is. There's an island. In the middle of the island, there is a lake. Beside the lake, there is a tree. On the island, in the middle of the island, there is a castle. On the top of the tree, there is a monster. Some of you had the answer before I even finished. Okay. All right. Okay. Got the idea? So what we're using here are these kinds of chunks, which is these expressions, which are incredibly common in English. Oh, well, I mean, in any language, because we describe position, location all the time. So these are some of the common phrases. Now you can project these on the board, or you can write them or dictate them. So we've got some unfinished chunks at the back of that, in the middle of the, by the end of that, the top of the. So now I'm going to tell you what are the most common nouns for each of these chunks. No, you have to guess. I'm going to give you some nouns, and you have to tell me which ones go with which chunk. Some of them go twice. So these are the nouns, and you can write what you think, the number in the chat if you want to. So if you think it's this one comes after 4 at the top of the, then you write 4. So these are the nouns. Let me just see if I can find them. House. Bed. Year. 2023, year. Stairs. Stairs, like upstairs, downstairs. Night. Stairs again. Year again. Okay. Let me see how you did. I'm very good. Okay. Extreme. I think let's have a look. Here are the answers. Yeah. At the back of the house, in the middle of the night, by the end of the year, at the top of the stairs, at the beginning of the year, at the end of the day, on the edge of the bed, interesting, at the bottom of the stairs. Brilliant. So that's according to the British National. Notice that there's a kind of cultural thing going on here. This is British English, where houses have staircases, some houses, so hence the preoccupation with stairs. But notice at the end of the day is incredibly common. That is such a fixed expression in English. Okay, so now we've established what are the most common. So what are we going to do with them? Ask the students working in pairs or small groups to write a short story that incorporates as many of the combinations as they can. Yeah? Any of these combinations. And have them read the stories to the class to see which group has succeeded in incorporating the most combinations. So that's a way of putting these phrases to use. Okay, and the idea of writing short stories or writing narratives or dialogues or whatever is such a good one and so easy to set up and allows considerable creativity. And it comes, it's an idea that is used in this book, also published by Helbling, Teaching Chunks of Language, where so this is a book that focuses entirely on these formulaic expressions. And they comment in their introduction, putting these chunks, these target items, into a narrative makes those items especially easy to remember. It's easy to remember them when we've worked with them and when they're in some kind of story. And they add, it is helpful to students if they can use new vocabulary meaningfully, but not just meaningfully, and creatively. That's that word again. It's coming up. I wonder why. Okay, one more activity, which is in the same kind of type of activity. So you don't have to do this because we don't have time, but there's a workshop. I would get you 50-word stories. 50-word stories are great. 50 words and only 50 words, and not 49 or not 51. It has to be 50. That's the constraint. Yeah, remember our friend in Taiwan, she says, unless, it's the constraints, the limits, the limitations that are good for creativity. You work within what little data you've got, what little material you've got, what little time you've got, what little space you've got. So a 50-word story that includes these words: girl, boy, flower, and bicycle. So you don't do this because I haven't got time to read your stories. I know you're dying to do it. Okay, so that's the task you set the students. You can do this individually, they can do it in pairs, in groups, you can do it for homework before the lesson, whatever. And then, and this is in the book, then you read them, or they read this poem. And I'm going to read it to you because poetry was written to be listened to be read aloud. But don't get the students to read it aloud because they will make a mess of it. But you read it to them, or use the recording, which is available with the book. I'll read it to you because I love this poem. Girl, boy, flower, bicycle. This girl waits at that corner for this boy, freewheeling on his bicycle. She holds a flower in her hand, a gold flower. In her hand she holds the sun. With power between his thighs, the boy comes smiling to her. He rides a bicycle that glitters like the wind. This boy, this girl, they walk in step with the wind, arm in arm. They climb the level street to where, laid on the glittering handlebars, the flower is round and shining as the sun. Do you know why I love that poem? Because it's written by a compatriot of mine, a New Zealander, M.K. Joseph. We read that at school. We had that at school in our poetry books. And it evokes to me the city of Wellington in New Zealand, which is very windy, famously windy, and famously steep. So they climb the level streets to where interesting. So that's the poem. And they try to imagine the scene in their mind's eye. Now, some one or two difficult words, and they're like freewheeling and glitters, but you can deal with those through translation if all the students speak the same L1. They're not important words at all. Okay, so now what are we going to do with it? Okay, we're going to do, it's our famous substitution tables again. So you project or draw this following table or grid on the board, and all these words in the grid come from the poem, right? Now, I'm going to, the students are going to brainstorm, working in pairs or small groups, other words that could go into each column. Now, you could start them off by giving them some words yourself. Yeah, like apple, for example, or canoe, or path. Yeah, we're looking for words that are related in meaning. And oh yeah, exactly. There's the examples. Students work together to fill in all the spaces in the grid. Okay, got the idea. Now what are they going to do? Work individually on pairs. Students then choose 4 words from the grid to make the title of the poem. Remember, the title of the poem I just read you was called Girl, Boy, Flower, Bicycle. So they write, you know, they take 4 words. It might be apple, it might be dog, tennis ball. They then write the poem. They then write the poem using the original as a model, going back to that idea. And of course, these poems, if you're in a real classroom, you can put around the wall, and you can give each student a bundle of post-it notes, little yellow stick-on notes, and they go around, they do a gallery walk. So they're all walking around, reading all the poems that are around the wall, and they write a comment on the post-it, and they put it on the poem. Okay, we're getting near the end, folks. So let's just sum up with a couple more quotations from Rod Ellis, from that same book I mentioned on creativity. He comes back to this tension, remember, between creativity and conformity. We need to conceive of second language learners as striving for a balance between creativity and conformity. And he goes on to say, the task facing the language teacher then is to facilitate this process of finding the balance. And listen to this, by allowing room for the natural process of creative construction. So allowing the learners to be creative, but while also facilitating conformity to the grammar, to the target language norms. So those substitution tables facilitate conformity. You can't go outside the substitution table. You have to follow the order of the substitution table. But you can be as creative as you want with the words in the substitution table, the small data set, as the woman in Taiwan says. So before we finish, let's go back to our friend, my student. And I want you to think, how would you respond to this if it wasn't a test, but they produced it in class? And you could say, well, a lot of mistakes here. Best day of my life when I was born. Not this day, but that day. Her weight was, no, she weighed. When the 12 o'clock, no, when it was 12 o'clock. I can't to sleep. No, I couldn't sleep. Much spelling of, and in the bowels of my mother. Where did he get this expression? No, in my mother's womb. That's one way you could respond to this text. Or you could respond to it like this. Because it's wonderful. It's wonderful. And because we need to lower the cost of failure, as James Paul G says, we need to encourage learners to explore and try things. We need to be able to say, it's okay. It's okay to produce a text like this. It's great. You've explored and you've tried things, because language uses a balance between routine and creativity. And that, my friends, is that. And thank you very much for participating. If you have any questions or comments, then I'm just going to open the chat, which I've had closed. And meanwhile, if you are interested in joining the the public community on social media, then there's a QR code. You can just download that, and then you can get into this wonderful community of global community of English language teachers who are as creative as you are. So thank you so much, everybody. You're a wonderful, wonderful group. I've never seen such creativity in such a small space.